Hi.
Hi, Brooke. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
That's great. I'm really excited to be here today talking about not just sustainability and sort of mapping out routes to sustainability, but actually digging a little bit deeper into one key component of sustainability within the fashion industry, which is chemicals. So don't let that put you off from the outset. This is going to be the kind of discussion that demystifies chemicals and makes this whole area a lot more tangible. So first of all, just a quick introduction. I'm Brooke Roberts-Islam, founder of Techstyler, a publisher and advisory service for sustainability and fashion technology, and senior contributor at Forbes. Helpfully, I hold both science and fashion degrees, and I've had an overlapping scientific and fashion career, so I hope that will come in handy today. And I know that Jill Dumain, CEO of Bluesign, shares these same dual passions. She's had over 2 decades of experience at Patagonia, initially as a testing technician in the fabric laboratories, then moving through the textile research ranks to be director of global environmental strategy. Jill was appointed CEO of Bluesign, a consultancy service for textile chemical analysis and certification in 2017. So we're really privileged to have someone with the depth of knowledge that Jill has here to unpack this topic for us. And Jill, when we spoke ahead of this fireside, we agreed that a little intro into what chemicals means might be helpful.
Absolutely.
So with your permission, I'm just going to launch into what I've noticed as a journalist as a tendency within the fashion industry to assume that chemicals are always bad and that chemical actually means toxic or harmful. But actually, the word chemical simply means a combination of different elements where a reaction takes place. So you could use the example of 2 hydrogen atoms joining with an oxygen atom to make water, which is a perfectly safe chemical existing in nature, as many chemicals do. But what Jill and I will be talking about today is chemicals in relation to textile production, where we need a vast range of chemistry to deliver on the vision and the creativity of the fashion industry. We need dyeing effects, special finishings, matte and shiny finishings. We need waterproofing. We need breathability and waterproofing, all of these different things. So the chemistry that we develop in order to deliver that has to be safe. And we're talking about nuance here because it's possible to tweak chemistry that's unsafe and make it safe and still perform. So Jill's going to help us to understand the role that Bluesign has in informing and implementing safe chemical practice across the fashion supply chains. And she'll also help us to understand why it's important for brands and designers to know this information and what's pivotal for them. And it's so closely linked to sustainability, it's fundamental. So Jill, I'm not going to speak anymore. I want to hear from you. I want to hear about what you do at Bluesign, your approach, and what you're going to share with us today in terms of use cases and how you're working with the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely, Brooke. Thank you for that introduction. And for all of you out there, the irony of this interview is Brooke is actually the chemist. I am not. And so when you have chemistry questions, ask Brooke. If you have implementation questions, you can come to me. But it's
actually applied physics that I
okay. But it's wonderful to have somebody with the science background with the ability to translate it into this language that we can all understand so that it's not so intimidating. And I think that is one of the most important things here. And at Bluesign, it was 20 years ago when the company began and taking this very comprehensive approach to this in the supply chain. And I sat in a brand chair for many years. I had responsibility around chemical management, implementation of it, and trying to figure out the best way to do it. And at the time, Patagonia wasn't such a big brand. And so I didn't have endless resources. I didn't have huge budgets. I didn't have, I think, a lot of the tools that people assume Patagonia might have around sustainability. It's a much bigger company today, but still it's trying to figure out the best way to do it from a business standpoint. And then when I made the leap over to Bluesign, it's been very interesting to see how different brands do approach what we're doing and what we're offering. So for me, again, I think the most attractive part about Bluesign is it's a very comprehensive solution. It starts all the way back at how chemicals are manufactured. So we evaluate an on-site assessment, see are the air emissions good, are the water emissions, all of those things happening. And then we look at the products and assess each chemical. Is the chemical itself dangerous? Is it toxic? Is it hazard? Is it safe to be used in the textile mill, which is the next stop, in the process it's meant to be used? So then we look at the textile mill, same on-site assessment, what kind of chemistry they're using, how are they using it, and then it goes to a fabric, which is an approval onto a brand. So when a brand buys an approved fabric, they know all of these processes have happened behind the scenes, down to looking at how chemicals are manufactured. And so I think with Bluesign, it's really getting at this input stream management, solving the issues from the beginning, not letting them crop up at the end of the process.
Sure, because a lot of testing happens at the end of the process, during or after shipment, even on goods that have arrived at their destination country to go into warehousing and then sales. So I completely understand that reactionary approach is not optimal. It would be really good, I think, to touch on what Bluesign does in terms of taking, I guess, the very large and complex role of understanding global regulations and, new developing chemistry that, is crucial to the industry. I mean, it's impossible, I would say, for a brand to keep abreast of all of the regulations and what chemicals can and can't be used and in what quantities. So how does Bluesign navigate collating all of that, analyzing it, and then assessing based on that?
So one of our main tools that we use is called the Bluesign tool. And that was a proprietary, customized assessment system that is looking at each chemical product for what it is. And then we rate them with it's allowed to be used with certain conditions, or it's not allowed at all, and it's put onto the blacklist. So part of that evaluation of looking at what chemicals can be Bluesign approved, legislation is one of those. So we look at the main global ones, we look at the most important ones that are influencing more regional legislation. So when we do a Bluesign approved chemical, it's going to meet the major international regulations that, in our experience, are the ones that typically start to impact the more regional ones. If there's a specific regional one of our clients is concerned about, or they're selling into a market that has some of that, then we have the ability to go back and look at would the chemical meet that requirement or not. But generally, it's works for the majority of the chemicals going through because it's looking at the major ones. REACH is one that's in the European Union that then starts to impact all of them around the world. So we're looking at global ones in that kind of way.
Right. So really using the most stringent as the benchmark.
And in my experience, again, at the brands typically aren't making production for different sales channels. It just doesn't make sense. And so then the most stringent legislation is what tends to govern no matter where they're selling. And then the other point, by looking at the chemistry with the same criteria, the fabrics with the same criteria, a brand can be assured if they're buying a Bluesign approved product, it goes through the same evaluation process no matter where they're buying it. And for me, again, when I was purchasing, it just took that whole part off of my plate. If I knew I was buying from a Bluesign supplier, then I knew all of these conditions were met behind the scenes.
And I guess some of the audience listening in now from brands or from smaller independent companies and who are designing themselves might be thinking, why can't my supplier take care of this? This isn't my area of expertise. We all know it's a very challenging time for designers and brands right now. So why is it important that brands and designers take a role here and become more informed and engage more with what chemicals are used and start monitoring of some sort, or at least put in place a knowledge base within their teams?
Right. And yes, I would say it's everybody's responsibility. It's the whole supply chain. And again, with the systematic approach we have, we place those responsibilities up and down the supply chain. But a brand starts the process during design. You make decisions. What color is it? What kind of performance attribute? Does it need to be waterproof? Does it need to be water resistant? Does it have adhesives because you're putting something novelty on it? There's a lot of different places chemicals come in that we don't think about it. And as a designer, the more you know, the more you can care about what you're doing. And if you don't know, you can't care about it. So even a little bit of knowledge allows you to look at what you're making and how to make the decisions at the front end that impact down the line. And your suppliers are going to try to meet your requirements, and they may not share with you a better way or a different way to do it because they want to meet your requirements. So if you know enough to be able to say back to them, hey, this is going to be better from an environmental, from a toxicity, reduced water, reduced energy, any of those kinds of things, they all start to play in with the choice of chemistry and the choice of process that a designer can do without really taxing the chemical part of their brain if they don't have that.
Mm. And there's a really interesting sector of digital design emerging, and I know that you're working on some new technologies at Bluesign, but is the digitalization of fabrics allowing the Bluesign data and potentially subsequent consequences of choosing one fabric over another, is it allowing that to be integrated into the digital design process? Because, it could be quite haphazard to try to disseminate information to designers in another way, but that's sort of, if it was inbuilt into systems, is that something that you're looking at?
Yeah, it is, and I would say it even just begins back to the systematic approach of Bluesign. When I was talking with my designers and working through issues with them, and they would hear something or read something and say, such and such is bad, but I need it for this product. And my comment always back to them was, choose a Bluesign fabric. I know, but it's bad. So how do I add? It's like, but Bluesign is taking care of that for us. So in the simplest form, even without digitalization, no budgets needed, just sourcing from suppliers that have already gone through that is a huge leap forward. That actually is quite an easy leap today. We have over 650 system partners, and so the choice is quite broad. But then we also do have online tools that we make available to our system partners that help with sourcing, especially for brands that are newer or brands that are smaller. And you can go in and choose a geographic location that your production department might have told you they want you to focus on. You can choose knit or woven, recycled or organic, or there's a lot of different choices. And then it narrows it down to the suppliers that have those capabilities. So my experience again was I never was looking for fabric XYZ specifically, but a capability of a circular knitted fabric coming from a certain region with organic cotton and Bluesign approved. So if I can narrow to a list of suppliers that can provide that to me, it's a huge head start, even compared to a trade show or something like that, where you're walking the halls hoping to find that little gem somewhere.
Yeah, but you're looking at it in isolation without all of the, the extra, what's becoming essential information about chemical use. And that brings me actually to the question about transparency, because I'd like to know a little bit more about Bluesign's role in shifting the industry towards safe chemical use for consumers. What's your part in this very big and complex, opaque supply chain and making it more transparent?
So when Bluesign came onto the market 20 years ago, we're just celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, which was really fun when it was 20 in 2020 before 2020 began. Yeah. But we're still happy we're here after 20 years. The best practice was really surrounding consumer safety, and that was the testing that you referred to. So it goes through the whole supply chain. Before it goes to a consumer, testing is done to see if there's any contaminants on it. Mm-hmm. But as also you pointed out, the ability to find that problem at that point is one, very difficult, and then very expensive. You have to choose what to do with these garments if they're not safe to the consumer. So that was a minimum hurdle Bluesign had to meet as they were developing the system and as it was growing. And so the idea with Bluesign was, still really prioritizing consumer safety, but also including worker safety along the supply chain. So if you look at an input stream management system and you don't put it in at the beginning, it's still not going to be there at the end. So the consumer's safe, but then you have the ability to say along the chain, all of the other colleagues that are working deep in the supply chain are also protected that way. So our systems allow us to have this traceability up and down, which can be used for root cause analysis. If there's a problem, it can just be getting to know who your supply chain is. But then also it allows a brand to be transparent to what level they want to be. So as we are looking and working with these different suppliers, we also collect metrics when we're on site. So how much water, how much energy, how does that relate to greenhouse gases? Is this mill above or below? If they're below, how do we help them get up to above? And so a brand can start to encourage their suppliers as well against some benchmarking numbers to see where they fall against the industry.
So it's really actually part of a very large system that needs to become more sustainable, and that change really from the initial chemical stage is essential to ensure that that problem doesn't follow the material and the product all the way through to the consumer. I've heard, a number of different people in this area, including the Beehive team, talk about ingredients on a garment. And it got me thinking that often we look at the composition of a garment, for example, 100% organic cotton. But I was wondering, with your expertise and knowledge, what does that actually mean in terms of chemical composition? I mean, that's just the material, that's just the cellulose, let's say, it's just the plant. But I mean, I think, and I assume that people might buy that thinking that it is a completely bad chemical free. But talk me through that a little bit.
Absolutely. So organic is referring to how it's grown in the field, as the definition is. And back in the 90s, when the organic textiles were coming on the market, it really didn't mean much to the consumer, because it's hard to believe today, but at that point in time, organic didn't have a lot of equity in the name. And so brands had to be really intentional and strong in their education to talk to the consumers about what it was and how it was different. And I sort of feel like that's where chemical on fabric is today, that it's a topic people don't like to talk about. Pesticides also is a topic people don't like to talk about. And I just had a small debate with one of my board members. He said, but we're so much more complex in the chemical field than organic. So that's because we did a good job 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, and being able to explain it and bring the consumer along to understand it in a way that they can. And I mean, that's what I appreciate about journalists and the work that you guys are doing of bringing it into a level consumers can understand and be empowered by it. Because if they see a Bluesign mark or another one and they use their purchasing power, that's a very strong signal to the brand to keep going down that line. And so it becomes a very virtuous circle then, where the brand is rewarded for doing some of these extra steps. The consumer knows they're buying something responsible, and it really helps bring it along in a different way. So I think, like organic at the beginning, again, it was really, nobody knew what it was at all. And now 25 years later, it's different. Hopefully chemistry, we're going to see a shorter time period on that. And I've been really encouraged, actually, what I've seen in the media for the last 5 years, which I feel is really different than it was prior to that, of not shying away from the topics and being willing to go a little bit deeper to understand what that is.
Well, I think it's become necessary for one of the other main reasons that we're having this discussion, which is the urgent need for the industry to become more sustainable. And there's been a lot of work done in chemical recycling. Again, chemical doesn't mean bad. It's just the use of chemicals in order to recycle materials. There's been a lot of work done in this area recently because of the amount of waste the industry generates. And there was an interesting finding by IKEA, who uses, I think, one of the largest quantities of cotton of any company in the world, where they were not able to source enough cotton waste that was contaminant free as an input stream for their recycling processes. So that their circularity aims and their aims to, reach a certain percentage of recycled materials within their collections by a certain time was being hampered by chemistry. So I think it's important that we understand that chemistry and understanding the chemical component of materials affects whether or not they can be recycled. Maybe if you could expand on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about how some of your brands that you work with might be looking at circularity and analyzing their supply chain in that context.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody knows we are on a finite planet. We are going to run out of resources. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We ended because we became more efficient in something better. And I think that's the journey that we have to think about here. And so when you think of circularity, and I've always liked to think about it using the resources that are already in play. We don't have to drill more oil. We don't have to go and expand the human footprint throughout the globe. But chemicals have sort of been the missing piece in the circular conversation. And that, again, has changed in the last 12 to 18 months, which has been great. But when you think about the first product, there's a certain design brief that is going to be met. They're not typically thinking about product number 2, product number 3, or even product number 4 of where that might get recycled to. And that's where I think we either have to start understanding where is it going to be recycled to, or at least understanding what chemicals were used so it can be considered as you go into the next product, whatever that might be in the circular process. And if you start not knowing, there can be some very strong unintended consequences of a product that maybe isn't meant for that end use.
I think this also highlights why understanding the chemistry or having visibility over it touches every aspect of the business, because it's how you communicate with your consumers, the degree to which you can be transparent, the degree to which you can recycle any materials or any products that are sort of reaching end of life from your supply chain and your sales. So I guess it's sometimes seen as this peripheral thing for someone else to worry about, but I think this highlights very nicely how it's actually at the center of most things where there's a materiality. We've got a minute or two. How did this happen?
I know, it goes so fast. The thing as a designer too is to not be intimidated by it. You don't have to be able to explain a molecule or an atom like Brooke did at the beginning of this. You have to just know what questions to ask your suppliers and how to show them that it's important to you. They're going to meet you there. They're going to be happy that you're starting to look at this level at a different way. And one very good unintended consequence for me, once I started looking at the environmental pieces of my supply chain and working with my suppliers differently, was I suddenly had a whole new development arena. They knew I was serious. I started to understand fabrics better. I could have a real conversation with them. And then suddenly, like, our development ability was in a very different frame. And I think where Bluesign also tries to do that is to take all the unsafe toys out of the sandbox. Yeah. So if you're playing in that Bluesign sandbox, then play with everything there. You're okay. You're in a safe space, and you don't have to understand the relationship between chemicals and substances and atoms and molecules and catalysts, all those things. It's okay. You don't have to know that.
Yeah, I guess what you're doing by bringing that to them is saying, I want a partnership. I want to work with you more closely. I want to collaborate. I want to understand what you're doing. And of course, that's the basis of any solid supply chain, isn't it?
And partnership. It's really important because it's not the brand telling the supplier what to do. It's learning from the supplier so the brand can make a better decision.